What's up, adventurers, to a brand new ShawnSetGO video. Today we're going to be talking about a bit more of Plunderstorm, but a bit more in depth of my first impressions of the game after I've attained a few victories, cleared out the Plunder store entirely of everything I could buy, and I have a few builds made up and then some improvements talked about. So we're just going to talk about the full arc of things, just because there is a Plunderstorm tournament coming up with a lot of creators coming together, and these are the things that I think are stifling the game, that maybe this is the reason why this is a 1 month type of game mode versus a game mode that could actually extend and be a long-term game mode. I personally think that this could be a nice alternative to typical PvP, as it were, sort of how delves are an alternative way for PvE, having these type of modes that appeal to people differently who have different skill sets. So I found this game mode to be a lot of fun, and I just feel like it does have a sort of ceiling where it kind of stops, and I think there's a lot of things that can be changed in that regard. So we're going to be going in game a little bit, talking about these things in the builds, but let's jump into it right now. So the first thing I'm going to talk about here is really just some general things about the game. So right now, I think one of the biggest issues that I've experienced, when you do have completion, and as you play this game, over and over, you're going to want to see the stats. But really, the only thing you can see is what happened to you, how you died and how many kills you got. I think a lot of people want to see how much damage they dealt, especially if they're playing duos and they're doing more than that. They're going to want to see damage. They want to see what kind of damage and with what ability that it caused, so they can kind of compare those things. So not being able to see those stats, or maybe last hits, or even like probably not possible, but like a play of the game would be interesting. Easy things that make the game very competitive, because this is a show-offy type of game mode. And then jumping into, this is kind of out of order a bit, but jumping into things like slicing winds. When you do cast abilities like this, it is very useful, especially to chase people, but its pathing can kind of range from, even if you do max, if you run over even just the smallest bit of occlusion, or a little bit of like, let's see if I can make it happen right here. Like, I just want to talk about a little bit of like obstacles, like that slight little step, even though I can walk over it, my character can't. It becomes a problem. So like these things of pathing is often an issue, whether it's slicing winds or maybe abilities that you cast outwards that shoot out. They can just get totally blocked by random bits of, and sometimes rocks as well. It's a problem. So those things need to be fixed. Celestial Barrage is another one of those abilities that I personally believe just overall it needs to be nerfed. The amount of damage that it does is ridiculous, especially depending on the range, even if it was just a trail off of the damage that it deals. But the issue with it isn't necessarily the range or the damage itself. It's how hard it is to avoid, even at long distances. It shoots very fast. It's not slow like some of the other abilities that you have time to actually dodge. Like if it was Mana Sphere, the thing about Mana Sphere is like if you cast it and it's a little bit, it's pretty fast. But if you cast it at its max, it's slow. This has none of those features. It is fast always, and it does damage not only in a straight line, but all these little circles, those little inner blue circles. So it has a width to it as well. So it's not even just a thin line. So it's a little bit too strong. There's a number of ways it can be nerfed, but obviously it needs to be nerfed. Moving on to some of the utility abilities and talking about them a bit more. Call of the Grand Feather. It's one of those abilities that has a lot of uses. You can apply it to enemies and bring them towards you, knock them away. But one of the biggest issues I find with the ability is how long it takes after the delay. So it casts the little bird aura and then it pops up afterwards, but it takes a long time. So you really have to overestimate how ahead of your enemy you want to cast this. That delay and a number of abilities delays is one of the biggest issues with them. They almost aren't viable because there's so much of a delay. Additionally, so like we move on to Storm Archon. So Storm Archon, to get its full use, especially early game, even though its use is early game, it's kind of weak. It's weak early game, and it doesn't have a lot of viability early game. It's more of like an harassing tool, and you get 3 casts out of it, whereas most spells you get 1 cast and then like a 12 to 18 second cooldown. So I would say that's where this one benefits. It does, to me, become fairly balanced in that way, and it's not very broken, but it's on its own. It's a good versatile ability, at least. So solid ability there. I think they've done good work with it. I think it can be tinkered just a little bit, but it's not too bad overall. In this game, there's not really a number of ways to heal. I think that's a big miss, especially with the amount of utility that's like mostly a meme in here. You kind of have to dip out of a lot of fights that would be much more intense if you could have just a little bit more heals or defensives, or maybe some sort of mana shield or something like that added to the game. Talking more about duos as opposed to solos, I think duos is a lot of fun as a concept. I think the problem with duos is that you can't resurrect your teammate once they're in the storm. I think there needs to be a way to, just like in like Apex Legends, grab their sort of token or an area you can resurrect no matter what, like an altar of some sort. That way you create zones that have big battles because people are trying to revive their teammates. The secondary way that I wanted to talk about Manosphere is that it sort of makes sense in a way, but when you cast it so you're on the high ground, it sort of goes down in a bit of an arc. I think it needs to change a little bit in that I think it needs to immediately drop to the ground and just follow the terrain. I think it would work much better that way, because the pathing otherwise, it just skips over people sometimes. Same thing with ground effects. If you're in the air, sometimes it can be a bit wonky as far as if you get hit or not. So those things need to change to be a bit more clear. Or if they're as intended, then totally fine, and then I'll ignore it. You know, if it's totally fine, it's just a way you can avoid it, totally fine. There's a few things like camera zoom that I think is a problem. I'm going to put these in the video, but there is a script that will increase your camera distance. I think normally it's about here with your max camera distance. I have mine increased, so it's a bit more. This is just an obvious like quality of life thing. The other thing is floating combat text. It's not given by default. So if you cast an ability, seeing that little bit of damage over their health is to me key. Talking about positioning instead of quality of life UI type of things. The portraits positioning to me is poor. I think being able to unlock that or move that would be nice, just because right now it's just in a very awkward spot, and it's very easy to like miss where your health is. So I like to have mine like sort of right below. So positioning on that or repositioning on that would be nice. And then just talking about it, you know, there's a lot of settings in here that I think you have to set with movements. You already know what you like if you play this game even a little bit, but the settings are super weird. A lot of them are there that don't even get used. And then a lot of like random stuff that you wouldn't know to use if you hadn't had time in this game. I think there needs to be a way for players who don't play WoW to play this game. So barring those behind settings that people don't know about, I think is a big miss. And there's a billion PvP players who would tell you that this is like not really good placement overall. There's a lot of issues, I would say, with the big AoE abilities. So let's talk about those a bit. So we're talking about strictly the big AoE abilities like Earthquake. Star Bomb is another one of those, and then Aura of Zealotry is another one. Of course, they cast big AoEs. I think the issue with a lot of these is that these abilities, unless whoever you're playing against has no idea what they're doing, they don't have a lot of like uses. You have to have a slow or a stun in order to make them work, which is a problem, especially with like Aura of Zealotry. Like when at the moment you put it up and you're running, it's going to be a problem, because the moment you leave it, you lose that speed, you lose that bonus attack, and it's like it's no longer useful. So everyone just kind of leaves it. I would say at least with Earthquake or Earthbreaker and the Star Bomb, at least with those, there's ways you can make them work as long as you have a utility ability that slows. But the fact that the Aura of Zealotry doesn't really fall into either of those is a problem, because that one, it's like at best, you're going to get half of this circle. What do they call this? A radius? You're going to get the radius of the circle before they leave. But typically what's going to happen is they're running from you and you're not going to get any of it. Maybe the edge of the circle at most. So I don't like how that's positioned or how that works currently. I think it needs to last for a few seconds outside of the circle for this aura specifically. Additionally, not being able to see these buffs or debuffs at all, especially with abilities like the smack roll, the poison ability, is a problem. So toxic smack roll, I apply it to them. I can't see the debuffs under them. Seems kind of silly. That way, I don't know if it needs to be reapplied. Additionally, I should be able to see what abilities someone has, especially because it's on my buff bar over here, to see what they have in advance. Especially if you could see things like rarity, that would be nice. I would like to have things like rarity available there. That way I can see if this fight's like a total loss. Like, you know, if I have very common abilities. I would say level matters more than your rarity now that I've played a little bit longer. But just to kind of have these things in advance where you can kind of get an idea of what people have. If they don't want to have that, totally fine. At least debuffs though. at least debuffs or active buffs that a player has. That way you can see what active abilities they have. For example, if you're using the shield here, the lightning bulwark, when it's active, I should see a buff, but also you should see a buff whenever you get that speed boost. That only makes sense. It only makes sense to me to see that happen, because as somebody who's facing that person, you want to be able to see when that buff is going to end, maybe. So I want to be able to see that buff there timed as a player, but then also as an enemy of that player, I want to be able to see when that's going to end. To me, that's just the logical course of things. One of the biggest frustrations that I have is that the victory tabard that you wear in the lobby actually doesn't appear in the game itself. Like, you don't wear it in the game itself. It takes it off immediately. So that's kind of silly to me. I think that needs to change. Another fortunate part about this game right now is early combat with other players is almost always not worth it. Maybe if they get an item you specifically want and don't have, but then again, I would maybe dissuade you against doing that combat if you don't have good items yourself. But secondarily, the amount of XP you get from zero, or the amount of like damage increase you get from level 1 to level 3 is insane. And then from 3 to 5 is another pretty big tick, and then to 7, and then to 9. So it's like, it's those big points that dissuade a lot of people from combat early on, and then you just hover around the edge of the circle. I think the strategy for the most people is to go to the edge of the circle. It's pretty uncontested. One, they're going to find less enemies because a lot of people are in the center, especially early on when they don't know what they're doing. And you're going to have, like, it's much easier when you have like a 3-level gap plus over the next enemy. I've been in plenty of battles where people are still in 5 and 6, and that's like well into the game. Rarity should have, or like the level, I guess, should have more effect on it as well. That way, if you have a higher rarity ability, you'd have more of a difference of an ability, difference of damage, I mean. And to put that into perspective, if you do like a high ranking, the one that I use a lot for examples of damage is the Celestial Barrage. This one specifically, if I just do a basic cast here, it dealt, looked like it hit it twice there. So physical damage, and then shadow damage. But then, oh, there's another quality of life. If you're gonna give me a practice arena, allow me to get the max rank ability as well. Also allow me to max rank my character if I choose. That way I can see what the ability does at max level. Like, I can't even see what the damage numbers are for for max level. So we're gonna do that. So it's 10 and 16. All right, and then it only did the shadow that time, but 18 damage that time. So literally only a 2 damage increase, but I increased that 4 different levels, or 3 different times. So a lot of it's weighed heavily on your character's level, and that seems kind of unfortunate, right? Now we're going to talk about some of the broken builds that I have discovered. So this setup is what I like to call like the Mage Build. And the reason why is because it's basically, you're going to be casting a lot of this at range. So you're going to be casting your Rhyme as a harassment tool. And while you're chasing an enemy, because this is castable instantly and it will never miss, you basically just cast it at the edge of a fight and you just kind of repeat. It actually does a decent chunk of damage too, whenever you're max level. So it's not too bad in damage wise, but you're just going to be doing that constantly on somebody. Additionally, if you're really chasing and you're really getting after somebody, this is Celestial Barrage. Of course, its range is absolutely bonkers. Reaching out to that little boat out there is insane. My other 2 tools are used mostly defensively, but can be used offensively. This is the Caltrops. What I like to do with that ability specifically is if you just jump and turn around, you can chase somebody too. So say you're chasing this little dummy over here. What you would do is you would kind of load up your attack. As you're running, you simply jump, turn, and you can close the distance a bit. May not be perfect, but at least you can close it a little bit better. Same thing with Celestial Barrage as well. It's a run ability, of course, but or if it's a like, and I wouldn't say gap closer, but it's a skill shot ability, and it's a snipe ability for sure. But you can also use it to make sure that the distance that you create is towards the enemy and not away, because whenever you cast it, it moves you backward defensively. So when you do it, jump, turn, and cast, and then turn around again. That way you can make sure that that gap closer is created a little bit too. So even though this doesn't have a lot of chase, there are abilities that you can use offensively to create chase. Additionally, Call of the Gale Feather. Like I said before, I'm not a big fan of the load up time. However, Whenever the storm starts coming up and you're trying to create distance as well as trying to avoid third parties, using Call of the Gale Feather to basically push away your enemies or just create a space and stand at the edge of the circle so you can heal up is another use of it for sure. I've pushed tons of enemies into the storm where they die by using Call of the Gale Feather. So big uses there. Also, its range is absolutely bananas. So if you're trying to use it for chase, you can. It takes a little bit more skill because of the load up time, but it has an insane range. So you can definitely do that at a pretty long range, and I would recommend doing that. So that's my first build, the Mage build. The second build that I have for you is my Shaman build, and it's got very Shaman-like abilities. So it's going to have Storm Archon as well as Earthbreaker, and then on top of that, you're going to use in your utility abilities, you need one of two things. I would say personally, I like having Windstorm first, and then Snowdrift would be the alternative. Good thing is about these utility abilities is that you can use, there's usually one or two alternates. They're not nearly as good, but at least they work in some sort of way. So that's a great ability to use whenever you're needing it, whenever you're needing a stun, and it works perfectly with Earthbreaker. So what you'll do is you'll cast the Storm, and then while they're stunned, go ahead and cast your Earthbreaker. So great combo right there. Like I said, these big AoE abilities really don't work on their own, especially late game. This one allows you to avoid allows you to be immune to crowd control as well. So once you land that storm, you're basically guaranteed it unless someone flashes away from it. So it's pretty solid for what it's worth. So I like that combination. And then of course, like I said, with the Storm Archon, it's just a harassing ability. So in between those Earthbreaker and Windstorm cooldowns, like 16 seconds total, it's going to be a little bit of time. So if you space out your Archon casts, you can have a harassment tool as well as that stunning tool. And then of course, I like to have something defensively always. And so my other utility ability would always be this. This way, what you can do as well, say you miss with your Windstorm, if you cast Caltrops, that slows. So once you've cast Caltrops, you can get right on top of them and then cast Earthbreaker. So it's another way in case you miss with your Windstorm, or if there's multiple enemies, to get your Earthbreaker in mass. So harassment tool, big damage, and then like insane damage once you're maxed out, and then some stun and CC. Not a whole lot of chase here as well, unless you're considering the stun to be part of that chase tool. But then again, like I said before, with explosive caltrops, just jumping, turning, and then casting it is another way to get yourself launched forward a bit. The third one I have is a bit more complex. I would say this is like a very high mastery. Like once you've mastered like aggression in this game, I would say this is a very good build for you. Sort of hard to set up a bit, but together it's insane how much you can do. There's a couple of options in utility because this is what I call the monk/engineer build. So it's very explosive with how much you can chase in this. Optimally, I think you would have something like Quaking Leap. And then for defensive utility, I would have something like Caltrops. But I could hear an argument for, instead of Quaking Leap, having something like Snowdrift, and then having something like Lightning Bulwark as well. Since I've shown you a bit of Caltrops already and Lightning Bulwark, I'm just going to show you the offensive abilities, Quaking Leap, and then what was the other one? Snowdrift. So the reason why I say it's offensive abilities is because both of these are used primarily offensively, and what you'll do with Quaking Leap is you'll leap, drop. On that drop and on that stun, you'll immediately cast your Fire Whirl on your enemy. If you're using something like Snowdrift, you're close to your enemy, so maybe you used Bulwark and that electric charge is you're running fast. You immediately cast this on your enemy, and it casts a stacking slow on them. Once they have that slowing effect, then you can cast your big AoE spell. But I can hear an argument for doing both offensives. You know, just kind of really just capitalizing on it, going up, going down. This does damage, and then immediately casting Fire Whirl after that. So you have that slow. It's just that you have to kind of do them all together. And then after that, really your only chase ability would be this one. I'm not a big fan of this just because the pathing is off and I don't think it's wide enough. But when it lands, it's a solid amount of damage. So what you could do is essentially use your one to reach, use your leap to get on top of them, use your slow to deal damage and slow, and then use your fire whirl after that. I doubt anyone would be alive after that. And plus they're big AoE too, so it's going to deal damage to everybody around you. So big build, but just hard to master and line everything up perfectly, but actually does an insane amount of damage. That is really cool. So that is, for the most part, everything I have to say about Plunderstorm right now. The improvements, the changes, the abilities I like. I know this video is ran extra long, but I really didn't see any guides that were really extensive like this and comprehensive like this. So I wanted to put out sort of a super long video that talks about the things that need to be improved, the builds that work, the styles that work, and kind of how I prefer to use them. Just because to me, these things together could make a great game mode and alternate PvP. But right now it's kind of just being the separate thing to kind of feel like as a content filler, which is fine as well. But I think adding more depth to it might have a lot more people that like it, and or people join and play World of Warcraft because they like the style of this game. It's all about bridging those gaps between player styles and things that people like. This is very much a mixture between battle royales and what League players are used to. So it's a good way to combine those things. I mean, especially because right now in Classic WoW, we have a lot of League players that are playing because of Tyler 1. So there's a lot of new benefits that I think could add to this. And I hope this was informative. I hope this was comprehensive, but hope you liked the video. Please do give it a like, subscribe to the page so the video like this, that's like nearly an hour long, could get some attention. I would greatly appreciate it. But until next time, guys, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.